Okay, hi. Today we're just finished the solar eclipse. It's not, we didn't see it, but it just happened. So we're just coming the light energy out of the darkness. It's a nice day. Okay, this is our last class for the level 8 of deeper considerations. And this is a class on relationships of how to put two charts together. So we spent a long time working on just one natal chart, on your own chart, and doing all the different steps. To put two charts together, you have to have done that. You have to have covered all those areas for one chart, and looked at the next chart, gone through the steps for the second chart, and then be prepared to compare the two of them. Now, usually in practice, it's not done that intensely. It's short, but anytime you take something out, you're taking something out. Anytime you cut a corner, or you do it shorter, or do it faster, you're going to be taking away something. And nobody may not notice, there's always plenty of stuff to talk about, but there's a tendency of disproportionately accentuating the good or the difficult things. And it's a lot to hold one chart together. It's a lot to hold two charts together. So then you got to add all the aspects of each chart to each other, and all the situations of each to each other, to see how they affect each other. It's simple, but it's tedious. A computer report can do it really easily in certain ways, but really to assess it and then be able to put it in, each person's going to have their own time perspective. We're not getting into the time perspectives today on looking at when things happen. This is just looking at how how each person affects each other. So we're going to take Princess Diana and Prince Charles. Okay, we're going to take their two charts. There's a dramatic couple. And the steps are fairly simple. We have to look at each chart first, take a glance at each chart, and get a sense of it. We're not going to spend a lot. We're going to do some shortcuts. Can't look over everything because we want to concentrate on the party coming together, but we still got to do some parts of it to get the steps clear. And as with most things that get complicated, it's more a question of organizing your material properly and going through it properly. So you never can go through, especially now that you know all the different layers and added the extra depth into astrology, you can never do everything on someone's chart. You can never define a person in their chart. You can see patterns, you can see tendencies, you can get to explore the universe of that person and become more sensitive to some things than others, and you'll do it according to your own chart as well. So it's so the object is not to define, but to tune in, or to have as thoroughly assess a circumstance as one can. Again, okay, we're just going to go through the steps and see. You just have to remember, it's not just about aspects. Okay, like the aspects relate to the stress tensions between each other. The aspects you have in your chart, they're always going to be there. The tensions you work with. There's aspects in the other person's chart, they're always going to have that. And the aspects that happen between the two of you, those are general normal stress levels or tensions that are there. But the deeper side of it is each person's planet. You have your planets in your houses, your planets in your signs. They're colored by the planet. Each planet's a level of consciousness that's colored by the signs of the zodiac that it's in, and all of its layers. And then it directs its energy into the affairs of the house that it's in, and all of its layers. And it does it easily or difficultly or stressfully or non-stressful according to the aspects made to it. But whatever that stress level is, that's normal for that person. So when you're comparing a chart, you're almost adding the two charts together. But if you just add them together, they pile up too much. Well, I mean, you can make a composite chart. You can put one chart with both planets in it. Take the planets and put them. But then it's a question of whose house system do you use? So they have such things as composite charts, taking the midpoint of every planet and making a new chart, or relationship charts, taking the point between time, in the midpoint in time between when the two of them were born, and using that as a symbol of the relationship. I don't use those at all. I have used them, I've studied them, I've looked at them, But the danger with using those ones that you're not taking either person's chart. You're taking something that's a theoretical point in between the two of them, saying that's the symbol of the relationship. And if it's a bad chart or a difficult chart or a stressful chart, you're going to interpret that stress as always there, whether they were 2 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old, 15, 20, 30, or 60. And there's a tendency to go way overboard or way out of proportion to assess the relationship from that. Like, well, so the relationship charts in the computer programs, they'll all have them. They'll have the composite or the relationship charts, and that's not what we're going to do to assess the relationship. We're looking at a comparison between the two charts. The synastry, how the two charts relate to each other, how two people relate to each other, how each one affects each other, how each one deals with their own energy, and how that energy goes and affects the other person. So essentially, we're taking the we're going to look at Princess Diana's chart, and then we're going to see how each planet in her chart works. Then we're going to see how each planet in her chart, we put her planets and her angles into the houses, into Prince Charles' chart. So we see how her moon goes into where it goes into his house and into his houses and his chart. We see how it affects that house, and then what aspects it makes, how easy or difficult it is to that chart. It's like adding another point to his chart, but it's her energy coming in, her moon coming in, her Mercury coming in, her Venus coming in, her Mars coming in, her Saturn coming in. How each planet, what energy puts goes into a certain house. It's not unless they have the same ascendant, it's not going to be the same houses. So there's a lot of information just thinking like that's the main work. Her planets affect his houses and his chart, each planet at a time. His planets, how he affects, so how she affects her is one thing. How she affects him is one thing. How he affects her, how each of his planets go into her chart and into her houses and make aspects of her chart, that's another layer. So these are the mechanics of planets in the houses, and the signs they bring with them, come into it. We all have the 12 houses. We all have the 12 signs. We all have the planets. We all have the same things. They're just accentuated differently. And those little accentuations make the distinctions between different attitudes in each person. And they create the pressure when two people come together. There's always energy when two people come together. It's good or bad. It's going to have its own cycles too. It's going to have its ups and downs. So with transit, one person could be up, the other could be down, or they can both be up at the same time, down at the same time. It just depends what you got. But you work with each chart and you watch the transits. They each have their own timings, and you watch how those things happen to see the timings between each person. Who's triggering off, who's getting triggered off when, what crises are built up when, do they happen at the same time, or are they one after the other? You begin to see things like that. So you have a good ability to understand natal charts by now, and you have a good ability to work with transits and see the cycles by now for one person. So you just have to do double that to begin to be as your prep work before you start the relationships. If you just jump into relationships without having a good centering on each person and what they're concerned about, how they're looking at things, you're going to miss it, or you're going to really get distorted or off track a little bit. So, okay. I have it this far back in the classes because I think there's so much other things to know to get a right perspective before you can assume you can even assess a relationship. Like there's so many relationships, there's not time to assess everybody's relationship, but you might want to do it for your kids. That's a lot of work still, but it's an ongoing thing you work on all your life. The husband, the wife, there's people but really it's an ongoing work in process, but you set the structures up. And there's a lot of information, just all the planets and signs, houses, aspects of one person's chart, all the planets and signs and houses in the other person's chart, plus the planets of one person into the other person's houses, the planets into the other person's houses, then the aspects between each planet to each other's planet. That's a lot of information to try and go through, and you have to. It only makes sense if you do one thing at a time and you develop the texture of it, the texture of the psyche, of the temple of the relationship. So I mean, in relationships, if you're looking at marital relationships, it's based on a love or trust, sometimes based on money, sometimes love or trust, but generally there's a temple of trust in the relationship of how the two people believe and hold together, and then each person works within that and is aligned to it when it's going well. When it's not, it's being challenged by it. But really, you're being challenged by the other person, and you're each person's holding together or not. If the trust breaks or something breaks on it, the relationship's not going to get really difficult and perhaps not survive. People don't live forever. Relationships don't last forever. But we're not here to look at the determination of when it begins or when it ends, what's lucky, what's not. There's always going to be stress and tension in any relationship. No question. It's hard enough to take care of one body. To take care of two, you got double the work and then some. So we're not evaluating whether it's good or bad. Sometimes the most stressful relationships can be the most exciting relationships. It's intense, incredible, exciting, but it's so stressful. Then sometimes relationships are so smooth and easy, and it's so smooth and that is boring. And a relationship could break over too much stress, it could break over too much boredom. Go figure, as soon as you get one, you tend to want the other or idealize the other as we go around this. I'm not a master of relationships. I'm more a master of what goes wrong in relationships. Having 3 divorces, I had 3 intense, I had a few other intense relationships, but it was just, but you know, like I know all the things you can do wrong. But anyways, it's useful when you're looking at, you can't look at a chart to see if even one person is good or bad, but you can begin to see by looking at and observing what's happening. You can begin to observe whether someone's doing their chart well or not doing their chart well, or how it's working. You can see the egos. Okay, so Princess Diana is her basic chart. It's an old chart, has the old symbols of the signs on it, has the I Ching hexagrams on it, has her basic houses and signs and aspects. We'll just move it over to something a little more familiar. Just here's our computer printout. Okay, and with the computer printout, okay. Here in this chart, I always highlight the houses. I always have the shaded half below the horizon, and I line in the houses. I draw the ascendant in the middle, and a line right across the chart, on top of even the computer printed charts, because it really organizes the material, makes it easy to read. And I mark the squares and the oppositions as red. And if there's a T-square, I'll shade it in. If there's a grand trine, this almost was but wasn't quite, so it didn't get shaded in. They would be shaded in by light blue in between. Those are the only 2 major figures configurations. Sometimes there's a 2 or 3 T-squares that get shaded in, but this is my basic way of doing the chart, our basic RASA way of doing it.